Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the listeners of the Good Anime Palette Podcast. Welcome to episode 92, where we'll be going to be going over another iteration of the anime series adaptation primer. This is the 7th edition of it. Jason, sitting across from me, scratching his nose. I'm sitting here scratching my balls. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Well, as much as I can be, considering the weight and gravity of what we're talking about earlier, but let's get into some good stuff to look forward to.
Just a little behind the scenes. For a lot of the recordings we've been doing now, we've actually been doing back-to-back recordings so that we can try and fit as much recording done so that we have enough time to, one, do some editing, but two, also get enough time to catch up on material for upcoming episodes. So,
plus we're adults with lives, and we're busy. So
Jason's about to get even more busy.
Yeah.
Like actually, no. By the time this episode is released, Jason will be starting his new job. Yay!
Yeah,
let's all congratulate Jason.
Yeah.
Enough about that, boo. Okay, so we just got done recording episode 91, which was the second anime iceberg, and if you had listened to that,
doozy, man.
I think both Jason, well, more so Jason, but I'm definitely also like pretty shell shocked about what we had to talk about. And if you listen to that episode, you probably still are. So we're going to change the mood for this episode and talk about things to be excited for, things to look forward to, and things to actually hold some hope for. We're going to be going over 4 manga series that that have adaptations coming out in anime form, and some to be coming out very, very soon in the fall 2024 season. So, no need for disclaimers, no need for explanations. We're going to go straight into our discussion. Now, do we want to reveal the manga series we're talking about today, or do we go like in order just one by one?
Yeah, we'll just go in order one by one.
Okay. Excuse me. So, to start things off, we are going to be doing our ASAP7 with the first manga discussion today. Nina the Starry Bride, based on the ongoing manga series of the same name by Rikachi, who did both the story and the art. Originally published in Japanese by B Love. It is also available in English, published digitally by Kodansha USA since April 2021, and also in print since October 2023. It was the winner of the 46th Kodansha Manga Award in the Shoujo category of 2020. Current manga score of 7.61, popularity 6,509. So even though the membership looks quite low with 3,040, that's still enough to put it in the top 7,000, which, let's be real, there's so much manga, I'd still say that's pretty damn good.
Definitely very respectable.
Now, the manga is going to be getting an adaptation, as mentioned, which is scheduled to release on October 10th, fall 2024, produced by Signal MD. So, just give a little bit of a plot synopsis. The titular character, Nina, has a pretty rough start to life, stealing to survive and eventually being sold into slavery by her own brother. But to her surprise, her captor, Prince Azur, ordained that she would live the life of a princess, specifically that of the recently deceased Princess Priestess, Alicia. But despite her changing fortune, Nina won't give up her old life without a fight, and Azur might just be the one to finally match her wits. But how much can she trust Azur? And how can she stop the feelings budding in her heart, knowing she must eventually marry another? So, what we have here is a classic kind of fantastical romance drama, played out, in a relatively, at least, from what we've been reading, in a relatively slow burn pace. Despite the first couple of chapters being relatively intense. So I've read up to the 2 volumes. You read this quite a while ago, right?
Yeah, and then I reread it recently, and I've gone further than I was before. So I've gone about 4.5 volumes down.
So 2 volumes in for me, 4 for you. That is a pretty good sort of like summation of like what we would expect to see from this first season.
Yeah.
And so I'm always on the fence when it comes to anything romance, right? Like you've heard me before, where like I've said on record, I'm not the biggest fan of romance, but I also would like not stop talking about certain romance series.
I mean, like Golden Time, for example.
I fucking love Golden Time.
I mean, there are plenty.
And that's as romance as can be, with like some weird supernatural shit happening in it too.
And obviously there was another series that we're going to talk within this episode that I'm glad you jumped on that train for. So
yeah.
so
But we're not going to talk about
yeah.
that train yet. We're still staying on the tracks. So we got Nina the Starry Bride here.
And
so
it's coming out as of when we release the episode, it would be out a month from when we release this episode.
yeah, so you don't have to wait too long for it.
Yeah.
So upon the initial reading of it, I was not really prepared for how the first chapters would go in terms of how sad, intense, how much despair there would be. Yeah, I mean, yes, it is written in the synopsis, so I should have fully expected it. But I didn't read any synopsis. Like usually, whenever I read anything for the ASAP, my usual standard rule is don't read the synopsis, just go in blind. And so I was met with massive surprise because the cover art for it was, of course, very starry, very sort of subtle and like bright as well. Like when reading the first couple chapters, I was not really sure what direction it would go. I thought there was a lot of intensity, a lot of drama, some action too. It was actually pretty fucked up reading the first couple chapters.
And I think the art style is also very much like when we earlier another ASAP that we did was Qeeo Isekai, right? Where the art style in contrast to what is happening on the panels, you could argue it looks a little bit more lighthearted and cartoony to a certain extent. But the discussions or what is unfolding, I would argue, I mean, it's very simple in terms of the art style, in my opinion.
It's clean. It's standard clean. It does the job as expected with a lot of manga nowadays. So if you're ever worried about how like the character designs might be, don't worry. Everything is A-okay there.
Yeah, and obviously there are PVs that are out there already for the anime that's going to come out very, very soon. So you can see for yourself the aesthetics in terms of transitioning from manga to on-screen.
Yeah. So this is another one of those classic kind of feudal, fantastical, historical romance dramas that we've seen a lot of in the last 2 years, right? Like there's My Happy Marriage. There's some elements of it with Apothecary Diaries.
Yeah.
What else has been out?
But this reminds me of like a bride story, like desert kind of.
Yes, that one.
Mongolian,
that
a little bit Middle Eastern aesthetics, kind of mixed in with obviously more of like a fantasy kingdom type setting. And it's interesting because I read this like ages ago. I think like the first volume or two. And then because it was so long ago, I reread it recently and got to 4.5 volumes. And I have to be honest, Will, of these 4, this was the last one that I kind of finished, so to speak.
Oh, same. It was
the hardest to start.
I read all the other ones because there was. Well, actually, to be fair, we'll reveal which ones we're talking about later on. Unless of course, you're reading the episode description, then you would see which other mangas we're talking about. But I agree. In terms of like the 4 that were up for reading, Nina the Starry Bride was the last one to tackle for me.
Yeah.
But it was also because of how captivating the other ones were that kind of delayed my time to actually end up reading Nina the Starry Bride. But I also think it's because it's not to say that the romance genre is like just done and dusted and boring. It's more just the fact that like I think this particular ilk of like fantasy romance has been done fairly frequently in the last 2 years. And whether or not they're good, for the most part, they're all pretty decent to amazingly good. So I would not use that as a knock on them. What I would say, though, is with the Starry Bride, it doesn't do enough for me to feel like the series, if it got an when it gets an adaptation and coming out, it's not as much of a needle mover for me.
100% agree. Definitely. I think, for example, if we talk about Will, you watching Yuna of the Dawn.
Yuna of the Dawn's awesome.
Or me watching Snow White with the red hair. In terms of setting and tone and genre, it is similar ish, I would argue.
And to be fair, like I've said it before as well, and I think Jason would agree too. It's never fair to compare something that exists with another property,
Or even with properties that we're talking about today, because I would also argue it's the weakest of the four, but that doesn't mean it's weak on its own.
And at the same time, when comparing it to other existing properties of a similar genre, it's not fair either, because at that point you're just looking at things through tinted lenses and you're not giving it its full unbiased opinion, despite the fact that it's really, really impossible to be completely impartial.
Yeah, and also it's a very saturated genre, bro, right? I mean, you would agree in terms of the wealth of mangas that you can potentially adapt into anime.
I think it's just the fact that, like, with fantasy, like, fantasy series, regardless of them being action, romance, drama, comedy, and whatnot, like, yes, of course, like, when it is action, romance, comedy, those three things alone are enough to propel people to follow a series, whether the romance is believable, whether the comedy is funny, whether the action is intense. But when you put all that under the umbrella that is the fantasy genre, the most important thing for me for any fantasy series is its setting, right? Because you have to create a realistic world, or at least a world that I can buy into.
Right.
The world that I can immerse myself and be like, this is definitely not a real location, even though it's supposed to take inspiration from certain cultures, from certain historical times and whatnot. But at the same time, like, I can still see why, like, a certain situation, whether it's a romantic one, a comedic one, an adventure type kind of thing, I can buy into it and be like, yes, I don't care that they're riding on camels. I don't care that they are walking through deserts. I don't care if they're lost in like this nowhere land jungle, whatever it is. I'm there. I'm completely bought into it. With Nina the Starry Bride, I feel like the main thing that they missed out on is the setting itself, the location. The characters are well done in the sense that they do the job in portraying who they're supposed to be. A misunderstood damsel in distress who actually is a lot more powerful than people think. A knight in shining armor who gives off like the antagonistic vibe, but actually turns out to be on their side
and have secrets of their own.
And the kingdom itself having kind of cracks where it's like, oh, things seem to be really, really normal, but hey, actually, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Those things are completely 100% well done. What I feel was a miss with Starry Bride, though, Nina the Starry Bride, was that they didn't give enough sort of insight into the world that they live in, other than the fact that they always look up into the sky and talk about the stars that they're born under, and that's the fate that they've been predetermined to live. I felt like that wasn't necessarily played out enough, despite the fact that I've only read 2 volumes. I don't know how much more gets explored later on, but I feel that if half of your if a quarter of your title is the word starry, I would have hoped that there was more allusion to it. There would be more things talking about the environment that this particular character lives in, and hopefully then that might play an effect into the trials and tribulations that they experience throughout the story.
My if I were to argue issue with Nina the Starry Bride as an anime is pacing. I would
that's always going to be with like a fantasy drama, right?
Yeah. I mean, going off of what you're saying about a setting, right? I would argue in Nina the Starry Bride, and I'm sure you would agree, the setting is obviously there, but they don't really they do the bare bones minimum of like, here are the kingdoms. We have this Starry Festival, I guess, somewhere down the line. I'm not really spoiling anything. Or like they just mentioned, oh, there are these things, and then you're just kind of take it for granted that you kind of know what's it all about.
With a fantasy, it's like, I want to see the inner workings of a castle. I want to see what the townsfolk do. I want to see the interactions between the elite and the poor. I want to see that kind of that kind of social, cultural, historical interaction. You don't get a whole lot of that.
But to be fair, on the other hand, it's like, well, that's not what it's about. It's about a romance story. True. But on the other hand, for me, I also would agree with Will in that, like, well, if that's the case, right, that's not the focus, then don't focus on it.
Well, it's your whole cake analogy, right? Like, it's right now, like I've seen the base of the cake, but like you gotta give me some icing. You gotta put some accoutrements and garments on top. You gotta put the cherry on top of that shit, man. Like I want to be able to see everything and be able to be fully immersed, especially being a fantasy. And I think that's the core component, right? If you're playing any fantasy RPG and your setting sucks, it doesn't matter how good the gameplay is.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue, in a way, the more generic it is, the other things can stand out. Because that's not where, as in clear towards the creators and the consumers, that be like, oh, okay, the setting is just there as a backdrop, but the real focus is here. Here, it's like they want to have it both ways. And I would argue...
They don't do well enough for both.
Well, I would argue they do well for the character development, but the problem is, it is so slow and deliberate that as an anime, you're not going to be able to convince someone within that, like a 2-episode, 3-episode rule type shit even, I would argue.
Now, coming from the perspective of watching it as like an easy, slow kind of, it's, tune off from work and just enjoy something to numb my brain. Not in the sense that like this is just some dumb show to just laze about and put my eyes on the screen. This is more something that like you really just want to relax and enjoy. This would be ideal because of the fact that it is relatively slow paced. Though, as with Jason, I don't know how they're going to pace that slow pacing because there is a difference between being slow paced and being badly paced.
Yeah, and when I'm reading Nina and the Starry Bride, it reminds me of another series that debuted like a year ago or 2 years ago, Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts, where like it was like 2 curs, I think, and it was just this. It was appealing at first, and then but because it's really slow, everyone, including myself, kind of forgot about it. But I think it was pretty highly rated when all said and done. It's like a 7.6 or something.
Oh, no. 7.96.
Okay, shit. Well, there you go.
Very, very highly acclaimed now.
But it has like 24 episodes. And I think one of the things is when you see it as a cohesive product, then it all makes sense. But then as you go, it's like so slow.
So that's actually a very good comparison, right? As much as we don't want to do comparisons, because this is touted, the Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts, the anime series that Jason's talking about that came out in spring 2023. That one is also a fantasy romance.
Yep.
Right? So not to say that like we need to compare that setting with Nina's setting, the level of romance between the two and whatnot. It's more just... It has been done before, and you've seen the blueprint for other series that have come before Nina and the Starry Bride. With what we've read so far, with how we feel about Nina and the Starry Bride, I am confident that it would be well received. But by well received, I don't think it's going to be lower than a 7. That's what I mean.
Yeah,
I think
I would agree.
Yeah, and to be fair, right? Like Nina and the like with Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts, 7.94 for the
crazy
manga,
good,
and 7.96 for the anime. So consistent across the board. Now with Nina and the Starry Bride, of course, there's no score for the anime because it's not out yet. But the manga sits at a 7.62, right? I think that if it was at a 7.6 something or 7.5 something for the anime, that would be a success.
Yeah. And also, Signal MD, not the worst in terms of their production value and their repertoire, but not like singing praises on all heavens, you know what I mean?
Well, you say that. I mean, the last like 10 releases they've had, nothing has... Only one has breached a 7. The last, I'm not even going to name the series, but the last things that have had a score and they were like the primary studio to work on it, 5.64, 5.87, 5.67, 5.24, 6.34, 6.15, 6.03. That one being Platinum End.
Yeah.
The one that was actually above a 7, that was a 7.39, was Words Bubble Up Like Soda Pop.
Which, Netflix movie, pretty good. I would argue Signal MD in general is a very competent studio, clearly. They have produced a lot of works. But when I see the trailer of Nina and the Starry Bride, the only thing that I can think of is, oh yeah, that checks out. And that was it. Like, I wasn't in awe. I wasn't disappointed. But it was just like, okay, it looks good enough. And that's that. And that's literally what was going through my head. Like, oh, yeah, it doesn't look bad, but it's not like crazy visuals either. I mean...
The way I would equate it into like sort of, I guess, layman terms is that like this would be like trying to book a hotel and you just need somewhere to sleep.
Right.
Like you look around, oh, there's a hotel that's quite near, a subway station. It's convenient.
It's not the most rundown one. It's not.
It's a 3-star rating and a 3-star hotel.
Very middle of the road.
Got,
like, it's fine.
Got all the basic and generic amenities it has. Cool. I'll stay here. This is how I feel what Nina and the Starry Bright will be, in that it touches on the romance themes well enough. It touches on the character developments well enough. My main gripe is the lack of setting, or at least the lack of immersion and building of the world.
And for me, it's the lack of potential pace that you can do, because everything, especially in the beginning, is so jam-packed and dense with detail, trying to figure out the political allegiance, all these new characters, all these unconventional names.
I've forgotten, like, legitimately not often do I need to read a volume twice.
I see.
To remember who the characters are, because there's so many of them. When you say king this, king that, queen this, consort that, whatever, it's like.
And by the way, there are animes and mangas, Will, that you and I both read, where to remember these people and their names is very organic, is very easy. Whereas here, it's kind of like forcing you to like remember X, Y, and Z without like guiding you, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult when you think about it from an anime perspective, because manga, again, we've said it before with all other ASAPs, you can flip through pages, digital or not, at your leisure. You dictate the pace.
There's also manga series that literally, like, as a foreword, they'll have a panel where it lists all the characters and gives them basic descriptions. You don't get that with anime. Or at least, like, it would be really weird if
like
every
a recap episode, I guess, right?
But then, like,
no, I
let's
know.
let's not do with recaps, because even then it's like you're only recapping what happened in the plot. You're not recapping all the characters that are involved.
Yeah, no, I get you. I was just trolling.
No, but like that would be a legitimate way they could use.
I mean, JoJo has episodes where they recap.
Dude, like JoJo is the extreme example of how many stands and how many characters there are. But the thing is, with those characters and stands, they're all very identifiable, because they're all very, very differently animated and drawn. They all have like distinct characteristics and names you can remember. Whereas this, like, outside of Nina and Azure, I don't remember any of the names of the other characters.
Yeah, they all blend together, and I think that's the part when you say about the setting not captivating, and when I say the pace is so slow and deliberate that as a manga it might work, but as an anime it is really difficult to balance that, to get people into it.
Let's put it this way: when you look at both the manga and the anime entries on my anime list, for their character list, they only list 5 characters. But you know that when you read it, there's way more characters in there. And I think that is the issue there, where they put so much focus on those 5 characters, 3 main characters and 2 supporting characters, that all the other auxiliary characters kind of just fall by the wayside, even though some of them are actually very important to the plot. Right? Like the multitude of kings and emperors they have, like the queens that are doing the meddling behind the scenes.
Also assistants, like as in like the assistant to the prince, assistant to the king. And
I don't know who they are. I don't remember their names.
But they are important.
Yeah.
Because they're like their confidants. But yeah, I get you. I just think it will be a fine show. I think it will be a fine show, but I don't think it will be an outstanding show. And I know that sounds like I'm throwing shade at it, but I'm just being realistic.
Of the 4, I think this is going to be the most hot and cold, in the sense that you will have people who buy into the fantasy romance, but you also will have people that will be like, okay, well, what more can it offer besides a pseudo, maybe it's real kind of romance, and I know it's a fantasy setting, but it's not that fully developed.
For me, when I give the manga a score in my mind, I would give it like a 7.5, leaning to an 8. But that's only because I've read more, right? And also, it wasn't the easiest to continue reading. Not saying that it wasn't interesting, but to get the engine running.
No, I think that's you might actually be onto something in which like maybe it isn't that interesting. That's the thing. I think a lot of it, because of how you set being slow paced, slow burn, it takes time for characters to sort of build their repertoire of communication and interactions with the other characters. It's hard to see why, or like any reason as to why people would be compelled to binge this series.
No, I think binging it will be fine because you don't have to wait. But how I would describe Nina, though,
even if you don't have to wait, I think like how active would you be in binging 3, 4, 5 episodes in a row? Because I would argue with the other ones, bro, like if all 12 episodes or all 24 episodes came out, I'm watching all those in one sitting. Nina, I watch it in blocks.
I just feel like the way that Nina is, the manga, or I'm guessing the anime is structured, it's like we do it brick by brick. But then if you want to see the house, you're going to have to wait a long time or come back later type shit.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when it comes to anime, you have less control, as in the creator, and Signal MD has less control over that as an anime, because a lot of it is in the hands of the consumer and the viewers.
Yeah, not to mention that not everybody subscribes to the whole 3-episode rule, where like maybe all they need is just 24 minutes, and then they can decide if they want to skip it or keep watching it.
Or I'll wait till the end of the season and then binge it. So,
or
who knows?
But by the end of the season, winter 2025 is out.
Yo, so
winter 2025 is out.
Yo, so let's also briefly mention fall 2024 being fucking stacked to the brim, bro. So it's like, when you look at all of that, to me, it's like you're sending Nina and the Starry Bride to die in the sea of crazy sequels and shows in the fall.
I wouldn't be so downtrodden on that. I would still think that there is obviously a space for any manga and any anime to succeed in any season. But you do have a point in the sense that, not only are we getting some massive hitters in, for example, like Uzumaki, finally coming out. Yeah, Dan's coming out. I mean, dude,
Blue Exorcist.
There's so much stuff coming out.
Alpharetta. Like,
Blue Lock is coming out. Blue Lock second season.
Bleach, right? So it's like, and also don't forget Orb, bro.
Yeah, Orb.
So look.
Danmachi season 5, Shangri-La Frontier.
There's literally an anime for almost every different genre.
Gun Gale Online season 2.
Yeah, that Nina and the Starry Bride is not even the top 10 that I would argue. Doesn't mean that it's not good.
Oh, it's definitely not top 10 if you look at just the popularity wise.
Right.
I mean, like, it's not even in the top 20. It's sitting alongside things like Love Live Superstar 3rd season, but that's because we know how diehard that small fan base is. Also, it's After School Hanako-kun.
Right. Yeah. And that one I would argue is even more hype because it's returning after like a long hiatus and
It
a
is
very
a
rushed
weird
season
one, though,
1.
because there's only 4 episodes slated for that one.
Yep.
It's a bit weird, but yeah, that's for like actual fall 2024 discussion. But back on Nina, I'm confident that it will do okay.
I think in the long run it will do fine.
Yeah.
I just think in the moment, when we look at fall, like in the moment then, it would be tough.
I think that either
to shine, literally.
Either it would need to have enough of a fan base to continue pushing up that viewership, or the production committee already have a succession plan in terms of getting a sequel ready, because I feel like it is one of the series in this discussion, right, for ASAP7 that has the potential of being a one and done.
Very much so. I would argue extremely likely.
There's another one that probably also might be a one and done, but
for a different reason,
very
for
different
sure.
reasons. So yeah, in terms of like a recommendation, right? Like, no thumbs up, 1 thumb up, 2 thumbs up. I think
one
it's
thumb up for me.
For me, it's like
the manga's. I think I like the manga. I don't hate it at all. In fact, I quite like it. The pace is definitely deliberate so that I enjoy it when I read it.
Yeah, this time around I actually have to take the school of the school of Jason in terms of reviewing, where like the positives are there, but the positives are as standard and as generic across the board as any other kind of metric you would give for a certain series. When you also factor in the negatives that you get, and to be fair, there's not a whole lot of things that are bad about it either, right? The things I'm talking about in terms of like the pacing, in terms of like the lack of setting, those are not necessarily deal breakers, but
they're not deal makers.
Yeah, there's no needle moving here, and so that's why I think that with this, it's a 1 thumb up for me as well. It's definitely something that's worth watching, whether or not it will stick the landing or continuously have your attention throughout the season. That's very much up to how, like Jason said, how the 12 episodes are paced.
That's literally why adaptations from like a manga to anime is not always clear cut or super easy.
Is it confirmed for 12 episodes?
I don't know for sure, but it definitely
It's a safe assumption, right?
Safe assumption. It says, I mean, it's unknown, so I'm assuming at least the very minimum occur, right? That's how it goes, right?
We move on to the next manga for ASAP7, and this one I would have actually had it as like the third option, but I'm happy to talk about it now because I just really want to talk about it.
Sure.
Blue Box, based on the ongoing manga series of the same name by Koji Miura, who did both the story and art, published in Japanese originally by WSJ, published digitally in English simulpubbed as Blue Box through Manga Plus service. The volumes have been published by Viz Media under the Shonen Jump imprint since November 2022. The original MAL score for the manga, 8.07 with a popularity of 255. Fucking amazing. Now, there's not an exact confirmed release date, though it is slated for October 2024, so still coming out in fall. Produced by Telecom Animation Film.
Now, Blue Box is a manga that I have mentioned throughout the existence of a Good Anime Palette.
Anytime we say the word blue, I think that like the word box coming afterwards has happened more than like 1 out of 2 times.
And it's quite interesting because we did our Redux episode and we mentioned that Blue Box is kind of very how do I put it? They don't come in with a bang, right? But they're there, and they're a big MVP, I would argue, in the lineup right now.
What it has right now is a very strong lineup of not just volumes released, but also metrics to back it up too.
Yeah.
In fact, in terms of all the manga series we're talking about for this one has released the most.
Yes.
Currently, with the Japanese side releasing 16 volumes, and the English publication...
It's like 12?
11. The 12th one's coming out in October.
Okay. Oh,
so,
coinciding with the premiere. Great.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
coincidence.
Perfect timing, right?
So
actually, wait, hold on. I do need to double check. Say your thoughts. I'm just going to research something.
So, in my opinion, Blue Box is a manga that is a romance comedy, more romance than comedy.
It's just romance. I think.
A sports romance, if you will.
So actually, the manga, the English publication for volume 12 in English is going to be releasing on October 1st.
Great.
So right primed and ready for the fall 2024 season. And I think like with
what is what day is that? Do you know in Japanese? The wood.
I can look it up right now.
Because I'm looking at the teaser trailer too. Even though they only said October 2024, it says it will premiere every whatever day at 11:56 p.m. So simulpub in 28, I guess, stations. At least that's what the Japanese kanji, I think, is interpreted as. Do you? Okay.
I'm looking it up right now. So
okay. Sorry, a little bit of
Thursday.
So it might be it's definitely a Thursday.
Yeah. So
they said every Thursday.
Or in Japanese, mokuyobi. That would be Thursday.
Right. So they're, at least in the trailer, they're doubling down on Thursday. So whenever week that would be. Okay. So now that we have laid the groundwork, what the fuck is this show manga about.
So I don't think it's absolutely necessary to name all the characters in it because
No.
I don't think the characters themselves are. It's weird to say they're not important. I don't think it's needed to know who is who and what's happening. What is most important to talk about here is that as a premise, this is probably the most generic of all four in that it has a love triangle / polygon. It's set in a high school.
It's very unassuming, right?
Yeah. And the characters themselves are all kind of in that phase of not just discovering love for the first time, but it's like unrequited love, or like just knowing that you love someone but not knowing how to reciprocate it, and not knowing if you can deal with the fallout of potentially having that romance fall out.
On top of all of this, it is using sports as a backdrop because all of the characters involved are in one way, shape, or form affiliated with a certain sport, whether it is badminton with our male main character, basketball with our main female character, and gymnastics
with our main female character number 2.
Yep.
And unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, okay. Unfortunately. So the list goes on and on and on. So, Will, I'm very curious because obviously if listeners were to trek back into what I feel about the manga, it's very obvious. I think it's fantastic.
It's the second best manga I've read all year.
Oh, there you go.
After Orb.
So, one thing I love about the manga...
I mean, like, do away with all the superlatives and the overexcitement and whatnot. Like, I'm actually being very realistic here. It's definitely not my second favorite, but it is definitely a manga that
you couldn't literally put down.
The fact that, like, of the available 11 volumes that are out, I've read all 11.
Yeah, like, that's crazy, bro.
I think it says something there, right?
Yeah, and also when you said earlier with Nina, right, obviously we foreshadowed it. Like, so you are not the biggest shoujo fan.
Well, not just that, too, but it's also, like, it seems like a bit of, like, a hypocrisy when we're talking about how generic certain things are in Nina, and yet we're also saying that this is one of the most generic sort of premises you can have for a series.
I would argue it's because it's the premise, not the execution, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the key difference there.
Yeah.
So what we have here is a very standard love triangle / polygon situation where characters want to love another, and whether or not they know it, they're fine. They just want to continue doing their thing. But what happens when, you know, things start boiling over and it becomes a bit more clear, though subtle, that subtly clear that hey, actually, you know what? Like, maybe that character does like that character, or maybe they also like me back. But what if I tell them, like, if I just like, I just straight up just tell them, hey,
right, confession.
Yeah, that's the word. How do I know it in Chinese when not in English? Like, confess my love to somebody, and like, what if they actually don't reciprocate the same feelings?
Right.
Sounds very standard and cookie cutter.
Or what about going to nationals as an athlete, as a team? What happens when you are trying with effort versus talent? You know, that whole debate.
What happens when you do love somebody, but at the same time you have a strong love for the sport that you do, and you're conflicted in whether you focus on the sport or focus on the relationship?
What about being true to yourself when you are trying your best to avoid or not confront the issue versus being out in the open but potentially burning bridges along the same lines? These very fundamental philosophical questions that surround love is very much a prominent theme in Blue Box, such that the saying of all is fair in love and war should be switched out for Blue Box with all is fair in love and sports.
I like the fact that you just said the word fundamentals, because this is the core of what it is. The fact that it's also countered with sports too, right? Like in any sport, particularly for me, like with soccer / association football, it doesn't really matter. I mean, of course, if you have the flashy skills, if you can score a goal from 40, 50 yards out, if you can do bicycle kicks, or you can, you know, run from one side of the field to another in like 10 seconds, all those are awesome. But if you can't pass a ball from one person to another within like 5 meters, then what's the point, right? And this is what I feel is like the core strength of Blue Box, in that it gets the fundamentals right.
And it's extremely simple. It's not trying to cloud you with all these symbolism and all of these layers and layers of misunderstanding and misconstrued of certain statements. It is very much plain as day, almost, right?
It's so plain that as a romance with excuse me, with love triangles and polygons, there are no dere archetypes.
Yeah.
There's no one that is.
I mean, there's a little bit of a tsundere, a little bit. But I would argue her personality is.
I think her sun, in your sense, I think it's more just the fact that she feels left out.
Or the fact that she can't overcome her own feelings or dodging it, essentially.
I mean, there's also a lot of psychological shit that happens in this as well, because they're not just navigating high school life, navigating romance, but also like highly competitive sports too, where they feel that if they're at the top of their game, they have to stay there and they can't let anything affect it. But at the same time, that means that they're breaking the relationships they may or may not have with other people,
Or losing out, right?
and again, super simple. It's nothing that reinvents the wheel, but they do it perfectly. The fundamentals are down to a T, and I don't see any fault in it whatsoever.
I also want to emphasize how quiet and also how naturally organic everything unfolds. Like, it's not melodramatic, even though I would argue it is very emotional to a certain extent.
Because a lot of the melodrama is internal.
Yeah.
It's never needed to be said out loud. Not like the other kinds of romance dramas where like you have people spilling out their heart.
Yeah, no declaration of love from the rooftops type shit. But this is also like, at the same time, it is very relatable because
you don't always have to go around and you don't have the opportunity nor the reliability of someone to confide your feelings in.
And even if you do, what if that person also has feelings of their own? Because obviously they do. And it is such a simple, plain premise that on that canvas, it is phenomenally in the way that it is structured and dialogued. It's so weird that on one hand, we argue plain is not, it's generic, it's not good.
No,
but then on the other hand,
I think what we might need to do is sort of change it so that we're not saying that it's generic. What we should be harping more on is that less is more.
Oh yeah, Fankel House, right?
I think this is a perfect example of just pure minimalism here, where you
and
have
the visuals, by the way,
you have enough characters, you have enough of depth for characters and how they interact with each other. There's enough romance that it's not overbearing, it's not overindulgence. It's just something that the characters can navigate in a decent pace.
And I would also argue, Will, based on what I've read already, and obviously if you read even like a volume or two, you would understand the characters are not dumb.
They're normal people. These aren't people that are like,
they're not genius level.
It's not the kind of romance where it's like someone likes you, but that other person has no clue. It's the fact that it's almost like that kind of romantic slash not sexual.
It's the biggest cock tease ever,
it's
bro.
not sexual at all, because there's nothing that is in any sense sexual about this at all. It is very much like innocent love, and people are like, I like you, but I like you too, but like I'll say I like you, you like me first.
And believe me when I say, as someone who reads a lot of shoujo manga, Blue Box is one of those mangas that I would say is the epitome of frustration for the consumer. And what I mean by that, in like the best of ways, is that when you get teased like the will they, won't they, or hey, just figure it out type shit, right? But to make me feel like not like screaming at, my iPad or screaming at my computer screen, but also just being like, oh shit, man, if only you got the balls, or if only you face reality. Like, you know what I mean?
The sense of frustration is a bit different from like having a dense romance MC.
Completely.
Where it's like when they finally get it, you're like, oh my god, this fucking moron finally gets it. Whereas this, it's like, yes, they're finally together. Oh my god, yes.
Or like you see their journey and you are not frustrated at the fact that they couldn't get it, but it's more like you actually see their progress and development and their thought process.
You're rooting for them.
Yeah, or like their friends chime in knowing, hey, you're not being true to yourself, or they're thinking about it, and then, or like some people like the glasses guy, I'll just say, super observant, and also,
I love him. I love Glasses. Glasses guy is awesome.
Qeeo, right? Also, shout outs to Karen that I actually am like super like on board with. And was it Hyaru? Haru?
Haru.
That's Taiki's. He's the junior.
Taiki. Yeah. How do you? Yeah.
I love him to death. I love all of these characters, and I think Chinatsu, who is the main female character of Blue Box, who is on all of the posters and everything, who plays basketball, I think she's voiced by Yor from Spy X Family. So, like, and also, even though she looks dense, it's actually kind of true, but kind of not. It's like, I mean, we're throwing like shades of gray in all of this, but I would like to emphasize that I think there's a reason why this show or this manga is probably one of the most hyped shows to come out of the Weekly Shonen Jump lineup.
It's weird because as hype as it is, it's also just very standard too.
Yep.
Right? But it gets all the basic things done perfectly. And that's what you want. You want an anime or a manga to have just get things done right. It doesn't have to be spectacular. It just has to work. And that's what Blue Box is. So in terms of how well this manga, this adaptation is going to be, look, it already has the stats to back it up, right? Even before it's released, it's already got 40,000 members following the anime entry on my anime list. So that already puts it in like the top 4,000 without even having a single minute broadcasted.
By the way, the trailer is extremely, extremely pretty. I cannot emphasize that enough. It looks fucking gorgeous. Like, crazy good for a ROM sports anime. It looks fucking phenomenal.
And yeah, you might think, like, telecom animation film, big studio, right? Like, and they've been running for well over, like, 45 years. They can't do anything wrong. Well, actually, the last couple of releases they've had haven't been the best. It's mostly like mid-6s, low-7s and stuff. So you might have, a little bit of like caution, I'd say, with how it's going to be adapted. But
I mean, when we talk about foundation, though, right? As in terms of Blue Box, the manga being like a very solid foundation. I would argue what is being shown already in terms of trailers has sets a very good precedent for what we will about to see in the fall.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is the manga is so well established and so well has foundation and plot and everything that I'm pretty confident that it is going to be one of the top anime of fall, period. I'm very confident. It'll be above an 8 guaranteed.
When you say top, though, you're also coming across a lot of juggernauts too.
Oh, no. Yeah, I understand. Like, especially if we need to probably discount, like, sequels, right? But I would argue...
You said just new shows?
Yes. Yeah, of course.
I think so.
I think, and especially with... It reminds me a bit of, like, when Horimiya made a huge splash. I would say Blue Box is, like, the Horimiya equivalent for fall.
Just to be clear, in terms of new shows that are coming out, and I'm not including Uzumaki here because Uzumaki has been existing for the last 4 fucking years, right? In terms of new shows, it's the most followed.
Right. For good reason.
Right after Dandadan.
Also for good reason.
Right? Everything else is like, you got ReZero, you got Blue Lock, you got Arifureta, you got
Danmachi,
Spirit Chronicles, you have Bleach, Shangri-La and all that. Yeah. And Gun Gale Online, like those rightfully would have more of a following. But the fact that Blue Box is the second most followed new series after Dandadan,
it says a lot.
Yeah. I think and like nothing else comes close. I mean, like you then have, I think the next one you have is You Are Miss Servant. That's the next most followed new series to come out.
So, Will, what would you give Blue Box, the manga, a score?
Manga itself,
I'll tell you, for me, I gave it a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I would give it a 9. I would give it dude, I'm up to current.
Yeah, I'm not even up to current.
Right?
That just tells you, right?
Right? Like I read it before you, and you've known about it for a long time.
No, I've read it ages ago.
Okay, well, I've read way more than you now.
Definitely,
so I'm going to take that trophy.
Sure.
But even then, it's just like it would be a disservice and a discredit to the amount of time I put into it without giving it a suitable score of a 9. I think like an 8 would have also been perfectly fine too, because the fact that is it super amazing? Is it like is the romance the best you've ever seen? No. But is it also something that when you're watching it, you're just yearning to see more? You want to see more that the petals of the rose like just bud even more? Yes, that was me. I definitely had no reason to give a shit about this manga, but I've read 11 volumes, so I clearly do give a shit. So
yeah, and I think it's gonna look fantastic, and it's gonna be one of the top anime in fall.
I think that it would probably be a scene with the popularity ratings so far on my anime list for fall 2024. It would be top 3 for new series.
100.
Yeah. It wouldn't be fair to factor in all the sequels and stuff.
Yeah.
That's just a whole different ballpark.
I just am glad that this anime looks the way it does, at least with the trailer footage, and the manga continues its consistency and quality despite a very generic plot. It's just executed so well and so refined in a way that it's so unassuming, but it's like this big juggernaut of a property, actually.
I don't think there's going to be, well, I hope not, but I don't think there's going to be any pacing issues with this either, because I think every chapter, every volume is similarly paced.
Yes.
They don't try to have, like, with any kind of drama, romance series, there's always like subplot A, subplot B, character interaction A, character interaction B, and things kind of just mesh all together and all that.
I would say it's a very thoughtful anime.
Yeah.
And a thoughtful manga for sure. Like it's very deliberate. It's also very easy to read. I don't know how would that translate on screen, but it is something that deserves your attention, even though everything that's happening on screen or in the manga is very mundane.
Do you know what I actually would argue is probably the most important of this?
What?
Sound design.
Because
you mentioned that it is kind of quiet at certain times, right? So when do you fill in with the music? What kind of music do you put into the background when there's nobody talking? And when there are people talking or confessing love or, even just being together with the person of interest, what's going to happen in terms of the sound?
They better fucking find the best Foley artist for sound of basketball in a gym and also a racket hitting a shuttlecock in a gym with echo. They better have those two sound effects down pat, or else it's not going to happen. This anime needs that.
I'm very optimistic of the outlook for this series.
Me too.
And I think that it should definitely be on a lot of people's to watch list.
Not definitely, it needs to be. Yeah. That's how I feel.
I think there really is no reason. I mean, the only reason would be is you just don't like romance.
I would argue that you don't need to when it is this good. To a certain degree. I mean, if it really turns you off, then that's fine. But I would argue the general, anime manga consumer would really vibe with Blue Box, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you have an absolute disdain for romance, then fine.
Then but we've lost you already then at that point, whoever you are, right?
Then you wouldn't even watch Nina the Starry Bride either.
Exactly.
Right?
So, I mean, we gone off about Blue Box, but I'm really glad that A, you like it, and B, that it's coming out, and C, I'm just really happy about Blue Box getting some sort of publicity, vouching, and shout out by us. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. I have a favorite character, or at least I have a character I'm rooting for the most, even though I know it's not going to happen.
Is it a spoiler?
Absolutely, it's a spoiler.
Okay, then you can tell me off air.
I'm not going to say it.
Okay, then you're going to tell me off air, or we'll talk about it some other time. But yeah, looking forward to it.
So we're going to put the brakes on this ASAP. We're going to come back with the second half where we reveal the last 2 manga series that will be getting anime adaptations either in fall 2024 or later on in the upcoming future. So until then, we'll catch you after the break.
welcome back to the second half of episode 92 of the Good Anime Palette podcast. We, as in me, Jason, and my co-host Will, are going over our 7th iteration of ASAP. We went over Nina the Starry Bride and gushed about Blue Box. But let's now move on to the other two properties that I think are pretty hype as well. Will, do you want to do the honors?
We're going to be talking about possibly the most hyped manga series for this ASAP, based on stats and scores. Medalist, based on the ongoing manga series of the same name by Tsurumai Kaida, who did the story and the art, originally published in Japanese by Afternoon, digitally in English by Kodansha USA since May 2021, and in print since March 2024. That's actually kind of crazy that like people still do print in this year as well.
Yeah,
but
it is. But
gotta make money somehow, right? So this series won the 68th Shogakukan Manga Award in the general category of 2023 and the 48th Kodansha Manga Award in the general category of 2024. So very much in everybody's eyesight right now. The metrics are insane. So popularity, not as high as I thought it would be at 1,681, but the raw score is an 8.51, putting it in 140th place of all manga and light novel series.
Has a premiere date of winter 2025, in other words, January 2025, produced by Engai.
Is that how it's pronounced?
Engi? Engai?
Engi?
Engi? E-N-G-I, basically,
Yeah.
in capital letters. So, Medalist.
Yeah, I'll leave this to Jason because this is in his wheelhouse. I'll give a quick synopsis.
Yeah.
It's about ice skating, figure skating. So
why is this in my wheelhouse, you might ask?
I'll let Jason
Okay.
reveal.
This is going to be it's going to sound really weird, but I'm just going to say it.
Dude, Jason, not too long ago, I talked about being a DJ at a graveyard, okay?
Yeah, okay. So, half of my life ago, actually more than half of my life ago, I was an under 18 amateur figure skater. To this day, behind Will, like on the other side of the wall, is my bedroom. Inside one of the closets is my ice skating shoes. I've been figure skating for about 7-8 years at the time, and at one point competed in Skate Asia, which is like the Asian circuit. I can still do probably like a bunch of like sit spins and axles. In case people are wondering, I am qualified by figure 10, and I have passed the freestyle 5 level. So basically, I'm into double jumps at the moment. Well, at the time. So I kind of have a very big investment into figure skating as a whole.
And what are we talking about right now?
Figure skating as a whole.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about an ice skater who, just, I guess, has the predicament of whenever you get into a sport or into a kind of skill, whether it is for passion, whether it's for money, whether it's for excellence and whatnot, there's always that question of, well, if I don't start early, is it too late?
Talent versus hard work, that kind of thing as well.
Yep. And so the I guess one of the main characters, Kasa Akuraji, has been kind of fighting this inner battle of wanting to achieve his former ambitions, but also kind of realizing that, or maybe forcing the reality upon himself that it's too little, too late. But then one day he comes across a young girl who kind of he sees himself in, right? This girl is Inori Yuitsuka, who's a 5th grader and is absolutely desperate to skate. So she, for one reason or another, was not able to get the permission to go ice skating. So she does it in secret. She does whatever she can to get her ice skates, to be able to get access to the rink and practice. But no matter how much she practices, she's never able to convince others around her that she has the know-how and the skills to break it into the world of professional figure skating, even to the point where even her mother feels like this is branded as like a useless skill, a useless waste of time.
Or a setup for disappointment and a waste, right, of your youth, right? Yeah.
Now, Tsukasa, the male main character here, the former competitive figure skater, has
Ice
seen
dancer.
it all.
Yeah.
Has seen it all. He just feels, no, like, I see this girl's got potential, and I don't want to waste her potential as the way that I wasted mine. The onus is on me. I take full responsibility in the training and the mentorship of this young girl, and I'm going to help her realize her dreams just in the same way that I regret not being able to make mine.
Yep. And that is Medalist. Now, Medalist is a manga that has been receiving a lot of praise, not only from critical acclaim, but also from various figure skaters IRL that talks about its authenticity in many different facets, whether it is the techniques of the figure skaters involved, the politics of how figure skaters and particularly their parents are involved,
The competitiveness between
the ruthlessness of it all. It is not a Yuri on Ice type of show. Nothing against Yuri on Ice. But this is more of like an Aowashi than a Blue Lock, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
Like, this is
absolutely.
all about the sport. And I would argue it is just that. They do very little character development. That's not its focus.
I'd say that it's because, like, the characters have already set the bar as soon as you're introduced to them.
Yeah.
You're introduced to a man who has fallen on his former ambitions and have given up on them, supposedly.
Right.
You have a girl who feels that she's just misunderstood and wants to achieve something that is against all odds. She still wants to achieve. Right. She doesn't have the right training. She doesn't have the approval of her family. She doesn't, well, her mother specifically, and she doesn't have age on her side either. Then you have characters who are also in a similar bucket in that they're massively talented, but the weight of stress and the weight of pressure is breaking down their shoulders. You have a mother who all of a sudden is like faced the dilemma of, well, I've seen other girls fail at this stage and she's starting even later. Why would I want to put my daughter through that despair?
Yeah.
Everything is laid out straight away when you meet a character, which is in a way like a bit of a double-edged sword in the sense that you already know who this character is, but there's also, at least from what I've read, not enough space for growth if there was to be further development for that character. But that doesn't matter, because it's not so much whether the characters grow, it's whether their involvement within this core focus, which is ice dancing, figure skating, how far that pushes that character. It doesn't matter whether that character is likable, it doesn't matter whether that character is devoted to the sport. What matters most is put on your skates and get on the rink.
Yeah. And as someone who loves figure skating and did a lot back in the day, I can attest that a lot of the appeal and themes of what it would feel like is very much accurate in the manga, such as, when a coach dedicates too much time to one student when it's a group class, or, hey, a coach has finite amount of time in a day, so why are you have preferential treatment? Or, hey, what if there is a better coach out there? What if
it's clear that there is a skater that's better than you?
Yeah. Or what if you have everything down pat, but when it comes time to perform, you fail, despite all your hard work to get to that point?
How would you fail? How would you feel when you encounter that sort of embarrassment?
And I think it juxtaposes it with fifth graders is very appropriate, because it almost highlights the brutality and like realism of what sports can do to you. It can bring you up. It can also grind you down.
I've watched enough interviews with athletes across multiple sports where the core thing they always talk about, especially when they get posed a question of what would you tell your younger self in preparation for what's to come in this sport, and a lot of them say it's discipline. It's being able to tune out the outside noise, being able to not fall into like your own wants and your own needs, because let's be real, As a fifth grader, you're like 10, 11 years old. What do you want to do? You want to have fun. You want to enjoy life. You want to meet your friends. You want to eat good food. But when it comes to the world of sport, especially competitive sport, there's almost no room for that.
They don't give a shit. Like the sport itself as an entity doesn't give a shit what age, what skills. Can you perform or not? Are you good or not? End of story.
Do you have good, work-life balance? Do you have...
We don't give a shit.
Do you have a good level? I mean, like, it's come more into the forefront now because of, like, mental health and well-being
for sure.
Athletes. But,
for sure. I'm not trying to, downplay that.
But that doesn't really mean, of course, that, like, all is well, right? You can have all the sports psychologists and therapists and all the the backroom staff to be able to help you be in tip-top condition, both physically and mentally. But the inner battle that you have with yourself, there's nothing that can ever be remedied if you are a defeatist, if you are hard on yourself and you can't break out of your shell, or you just have everything stepped up against you.
Now, personally speaking, as in me, Jason, when I gave up figure skating, it was when I had to go to boarding school. Okay, so what's the big deal? Because when you have to understand the mindset that teenage Jason was going through in terms of I was witnessing my peers way ahead of me, practicing more than me, which, by the way, at the time, I would be practicing 3 to 4 times a week, each time maybe 2 hours. And that was like I was already behind. I was competing against people that were younger than me or older than me, more talented, less talented, and the trials and tribulations that come with any sports and any competitive sports. At the end of the day, there is just a lot of grit that is needed, a lot of discipline, as you said, and I had to be honest. At one point, I was like, either I go all in, which, as we said with our main male character, Tsukasa, it might not even be enough, or it might even be too late. But are you going to venture down that road or not? Are you going to have regret or not? These types of very philosophical and very intense questions are encapsulated very well in Medalist, that it's almost giving me PTSD from like my sports days. And you could say, Jason, well, what about like the average non-athlete? I'm like, you can still glean a lot from... If you're not into figure skating, you can at least see the discipline, the sacrifice, especially when I said it's juxtaposed with fifth graders, because it's almost like appropriate that they didn't use teenagers.
Yeah.
Because the sacrifice that you have to make at a fifth grade, despite them doing already more stuff than I could do when I was 15, for example, is crazy.
I think it's also the weight of realization that you have to devote this much time and effort into something. Like, okay, this might not be like the best of comparisons, but when I was younger, I was really good at chess. 5th, 6th grade, I was like top ranked. I think like I competed within like our school systems circuit, ESF, English Schools Foundation, and within my age range, I was top 5.
Sure,
right, but I was never number 1. And after that, like after I got into 6th grade, 7th grade, and beyond, just never improved. And the reason why is because as a kid, when I was like fucking 9 through to 12 years old, I was reading strategy books. I was reading opening gambits and shit for like chess. I was looking into how to do counters, how to plan your head and all that. But after a while, I stopped because I just didn't want to do it. Not so much that I didn't want to do it anymore, but like I never took it seriously. I just happened to be really good at chess at that time. Similarly with my swimming, I used to be a competitive swimmer, at least at that age range, but I was never the best. Even though I was really, really good at swimming the breaststroke, I would train 3 times a week. Even during the winters, I fucking hated swimming in the winter. But after a while, I just became disinterested, right? But that would be something that's normal to expect when you're in the 5th grade. Whereas we're talking about a young girl here, right? Who, despite all the, I guess, the people who shut her down, the people who tell her she's not good enough,
or it's not worth it.
Exactly. Like Inori just feels like, no, like it's my dream and I want to achieve it. And you have to be very, very careful with how you mentor that, because you don't want to put so much expectation on such a fragile mind. Like, no matter how strong-willed and witted a fifth grader is, they're still a child.
Yeah, and also there is an element of when parents impose that on their children when it comes to professional figure skating, or the coaches, which is also tackled in Medalist. Almost all aspects of the figure skating sport, I would say, is very accurately encapsulated in this manga, such that it is an extremely outstanding manga in terms of realism in the world of figure skating. I can definitely attest to that.
And I also like that earlier you made that comparison to Ayawashi, because it very much holds to similar principles. Just because you're good doesn't mean you're good enough.
Yeah.
Just because you think you've got it doesn't mean that you're ready for it.
Trust me when I say you look at like the poster or like the art, and it's like, oh, it's like this happy-go-lucky young girl and like this really hot-blooded, like emotionally charged but very inspiring coach. And I go, yes, you're technically right. It has all of that, but it's probably one of the most cruelest, brutal
half of the
sports ever.
Half of the manga itself, and without being downtrodden, I mean this
Right.
in the most positive way.
Mhm.
Half of it is about disappointment. Disappointment in your ability, disappointment in your performance, disability in your situation, disappointment with reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just the fact that no matter how good or how hard you work at something, you may or may not make it. And it's always down to one thing: luck.
Sometimes, yeah, absolutely. In fact, if anything, it's needed, because I think even one of the head coaches at some point was like, you don't have luck, then you're fucked. And it's just really accurate, really poignant.
You pop
and
an
really
axle,
unfortunate.
you do some crazy spin, but your ski is just 1 degree off, and you don't land.
And the worst part is, I actually know how that feels.
Right?
Like, I legitimately have landed axles, and I just like blank out for like a split second, and I fall on the ground. Or how I learned to do the axle took like 2 months or like a month or something of me just constantly falling.
Every sport is always down to like the minor details. Like in soccer, you shoot your shot, you aim towards the goal. 1 millimeter in, it's a goal. 1 millimeter out, it hits the post, bounces back out.
And it doesn't discriminate. In fact, you could argue because it doesn't discriminate in a way, it's very cruel but very clean cut.
Yeah.
And I think, despite all of this, Will and I have not even mentioned a single frame, a single second about how it looks. By the way, it looks fine. It looks pretty good, to be honest.
Pretty fine. It looks amazing.
Yeah, and the trailer of like the figure skaters on the ice skating rink, in my opinion, blends the 3D of the ice skating rink with the 2D animation.
Oh wow, Jason actually praising 3D for once.
They blend it very well, in my opinion.
The fact that this time around you actually are like, yeah, there's 3D, it's cool. You're like, wait, well, hold on a second.
It reminds me a little bit of how Wistoria does 3D and 2D. Okay, it might not be that flashy. Or maybe there are, in the trailer, it just shows...
It's a different kind of flashy, because it's flashy in Wistoria for action purposes, whereas in Medalist, it's meant to show beauty. It's meant to show brilliance and elegance in a performance.
And the problem, if there is one, which is hard to tell just from like the very limited footage that we have seen that is available online publicly, is, and it even tackles it in the manga, is you cannot lose composure. If you fall, you have to get back up and smile and continue on your routine as if nothing ever happened, despite you knowing full well at the back of your mind you done fucked up. But it's not over, or is it? You got to finish with a smile on your face, or else it's definitely over.
That's the one area which I think might be a cause for concern about this manga, which is the composure to maintain quality throughout. Right?
Definitely.
What we've seen so far in terms of the blending of 3D and 2D, in terms of like them doing their tricks on the ice and all that, it looks fantastic. But
for 5 seconds.
Yeah, can they do that for 12 or however many episodes they're going to be doing it?
I don't know. I think it would be a very interesting question to ask. Or when do you do your Sakuga moment, so to speak? When do you put in the 60 frames per second versus your 30? You know, that kind of thing. Like,
but at the same time, I also don't believe that the success of the show depends on those moments either. It definitely helps.
For sure. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think you don't need to know a lot about figure skating to appreciate the theme of sports and sacrifice and talent versus hard work versus luck. And Medalist, I can at least tell you, is one of those mangas that definitely speaks near and dear to my heart, coincidentally, because I know a lot about figure skating, believe it or not. And it's a very brutal manga, but in like a very positive way.
It's brutally beautiful.
Yes.
That's what it is.
I gave it a 9 out of 10. I will still read it, but every time I read it, it's like
trauma.
It is trauma because I literally had thoughts, Will, of like, well, what if I didn't give it up? I mean, that's something that literally is like the central focal point of some of these characters, right? It's like, I see others already ahead. Do I really want... Also, by the way, guys, athletes in general, surprise, surprise, their longevity as a full-blown athlete is finite, right?
It is actually really crazy, especially like in most sports that I watch, like whether it's basketball, football, soccer, and all that. It's like...
Or even esports.
Yeah, especially esports.
Yeah,
where it's like you talk about this athlete in their prime, and then you talk about this athlete that is like 30, and then the big saying is, oh, they're on the wrong side of 30, even though they just turned 30, meaning that they're starting to get old, and you're like, bro, I'm 33. I don't know if I've lived more than half of my life yet. You're already calling this person like old
or washed up, right?
And it's
trying to chase their legacy.
It's way worse in esports because there are players that are 25 years old and they're deemed ancient.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of all that, it's like the fractured psyche of a fifth grader being placed in those pressure cooker situations, to me, highlights the gravity of sports in general, but in this case...
You can imagine being 11 years old and being told you're too old to succeed, and you're fucking 11 years old?
I don't think they could even process that or understand the real ramifications behind that statement. But yeah, absolutely.
It's that unfair pressure that you get from the outside that literally is a pretty good focal point within this manga series, where like you have voices that really have no input on who you are as a person, but because they're reviewing you as an athlete, they seem to have every authority to tell you whether you can or can't succeed.
And you have no choice in that matter.
Yeah.
And there's also obviously like, oh, the Olympian that now is the head coach or whatever. I'm not really spoiling anything, but obviously you would imagine in a sport something of this trope or archetype would occur. Oh, they are now the Olympian, was the Olympian, but now they are either trying to have their protege, or they ride the wave and then they didn't achieve the highest, they didn't sit on the podium when it was in their glory days, or the pressure that they felt, they're trying to repeat the same mistakes, not on purpose sometimes, or maybe even intentional, and put it on literally an 11-year-old. It's really fucked up.
Yeah, actually, what was really what I brought up was as an aside. You ever watch? I forgot. I think it's Dan someone. I forgot who it was as a sportscaster. He likes to bring in like current and former NFL athletes, like American football athletes. And what they would do is after they've had their success in their career, or they're still in the midst of their career, they would read old scouting reports of when they were in high school and in college.
Oh shit!
And what they would do is like read them and be like, oh, this quarterback too short, not fast enough. Does not get out of the pocket well, can't break down defenses, don't think he will succeed, he's a 2-star recruit. They're talking about Tom Brady.
Yeah.
They're talking about Aaron Rodgers.
Like, what is it? Like, Tom Brady was, like, University of Michigan backup at some point?
He was a 7th-round pick.
No, when he was at university. I think he went to University of Michigan.
No, but the most important thing is he was very low down the draft board, yet he's also then become...
Joke's like that, too. The Joker's like that, too.
The biggest and most successful quarterback of all time, arguably.
I mean, the Joker, NBA.
Nikola Jokic. Yeah, people still hate on him, but
but he was like slept on.
No, I get that, and I get he slept on. It's just that he's so statistically he is one of the best. Yet for some reason, people still hate on him, and I don't know why.
And I think Medalist is one of those shows that even if the anime doesn't do well, which I doubt, I think it will do really good.
Yeah.
I just think it's one of those mangas that encapsulates how it feels to be an athlete. And especially in this case, obviously, figure skating to a T.
Yeah,
That
it's definitely one of those. Don't you dare underestimate me, or else I'll prove you wrong.
and it's in many ways the most savage manga in a while that I've read. Not only because I have personal attachments to the sport of figure skating, but because
exactly you have done the sport, right?
but it's just ruthless. It just reminds me again that sports.
I mean, it was
ruthless.
it was the same way when I was watching Ayawashi, when I was playing soccer when I was a kid, and seeing that this really was the path that you needed to take to become one of the top amateur young players, and we're not even talking about professional yet, right? And this I think there's the same parallels with
and I'm not a
medalist.
And when I was a teenager and competing at my personal height, not everyone, my personal height, and I already experienced these issues to whatever nth degree because I went through it. I can only imagine. I can literally only imagine how it feels when it's exponentially worse or exponentially more severe or heavy. And I think Medalist captures that to a T. I give it 9 out of 10. I think the anime should do fine. And it is one of those shows that would really speak to you if you're an athlete of any sort that just understands how unforgiving but also equally rewarding sports can be.
Do you think it might be able to get a 10 out of 10 for you because of the fact you have that personal attachment to ice skating? And if they are able to get the pacing right, if they are able to get those quote-unquote sakuga moments right.
So, do you mean 10 out of 10 as in the manga or the anime? Because that's different.
Well, both. I mean, the anime would have an extra benefit of sound.
Yeah.
And motion.
I have no idea. It could just be an 8. I have no idea. I think it has a very good chance of being a 9. I don't think it will be a 10, but I am not necessarily stopping it from being a 10. It's just based on the information that I've read.
And you haven't seen the
and I
anime
haven't seen it yet. And also the execution of it could be flawed to a certain degree. I mean, we saw the ice skating part of it. It's like, okay, in the 5-second chunk, it looks fine. But what happens if it's dragged out over 12 episodes? It better be good, right? And that will hamper it. From the manga standpoint, one of the reasons why I didn't read that far ahead was because I'm getting PTSD from it. I know I'm throwing around PTSD as if it's like a very light thing. It's not. I take it seriously, but it just wells up a lot of emotions and memories that sometimes I wish was never there, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And I think if the manga was ever to be a 10, it has to be when I read more. Do you think the manga, because how many volumes have you read?
I'm on volume 5.
So I finished volume 2. So I'm in somewhere in volume 3. Do you think that what you have read, basically volume 4 or 5, changes your perspective if you only read the first, 2 or 3 volumes?
It would further strengthen whether you like it or not.
Right.
I think that what it really does well is that, as you mentioned, it doesn't really matter too much about who the characters are. It's more about how they interact and how they perform.
I mean, it's very much the Ayawashi thing too, right?
Yeah. I don't really have much of a favorite character in Ayawashi, but I like the journey that all the characters take.
Absolutely. And
right?
The theme of, as you said, I think the thing that we keep harping on is imperfection or sacrifice and being late to the party and doomed from the start type kind of theme is very, very raw and very traumatic for a lot of people. And I think it captures it very well.
Sports and drama, it's a good recipe to have.
Yeah, and I think the fact that Medalist is ranked so high in terms of MAL score, it can only be close, if not exceed that score for the anime.
Yep, lots of anticipation for this one. Now we move on to the final manga of ASAP7. This one is going to be a doozy. So, let's talk about Darwin Incident, based on the ongoing manga series of the same name by Umezawa, who I believe did both the art and the story. Originally published in Japanese by Afternoon, digitally in English by Kodansha USA under the Vertical Comics imprint since September 5th, 2023. In 2020, Darwin Incident won the Excellence Award at the 25th Japan Media Arts Festival and placed first in the Manga Taisho Award rankings. It also ranked 10th in 2022's Kodo Manga ga Sugoi in the Male Readers Top 20 and was nominated twice in the general category of the Kodansha Manga Awards in 2023 as well as 2024. Now, with all those awards and accolades on its resume, it might seem a bit conflicting with its stats on my anime list, where the raw score for the manga is a 7.26 and its popularity is only 5,475 with 3,684 members on the manga entry. So, those two things don't seem to really mix well, but let's break that down in just a bit.
Now,
by the way, produced by Toho Animation.
Yep.
No official release date yet. In fact, there's outside of promotional art, there isn't a trailer or other visuals for it. There's no details on who the voice actors and actresses are.
I think there literally is a poster. That's it.
Just a poster. So, what the fuck is Darwin Incident about?
I don't know how to do this.
I will just read the synopsis.
Yeah, that would be the easiest.
The Animal Liberation Alliance, an eco-terrorist organization, rescues a pregnant chimpanzee from an animal testing lab, only for it to give birth to a half-human, half-chimpanzee, a human-zee, named Charlie. 15 years later, Charlie's human foster parents are finally ready to send him to a normal high school where he makes his first friend, a human girl named Lucy. However, in the meantime, the Animal Liberation Alliance's stance has become ever more extreme, and now they're here to drag Charlie into their terrorist plot.
Now, a couple of things that I need to mention. The first thing is the manga, despite it being a Japanese production, it takes place in America. That's just pretty obvious from the get-go. When you start reading it, you'll realize that. The second thing is, even though Will and I won't spoil it, there are certain topics that we might cover in the Darwin Incident that might be a trigger for some people. So if you're uncomfortable, just know that Will and I are very positive on the manga, but at least for me, I'm unsure about the anime if I were to distill it in one go. What about you, Will?
I think that there's definitely some trigger warnings to be had about this simply because it covers a lot of very controversial topics in the sense that, I mean, the fact that the word terrorism is in the plot synopsis, you can kind of figure what things may ensue in the manga. But I think the problem with talking about Darwin Incident, as has been with a lot of series you've done in the past, like Orb, its crazy premise is just a crazy premise, and we can't divulge too deep into the plot because it just ruins the mystique about it. It's definitely one of those just watch it and find out.
Yeah,
just read it and find out.
If I were to give listeners an idea in terms of an anime, in terms of tone and in terms of
let's talk about the auxiliary stuff, right? So, as you mentioned, right, this being a Japanese production but set in America, you made a very good observation in the sense that this doesn't really feel like a manga.
It doesn't. I mean,
It feels like an American graphic novel. This is very much rooted in Middle America. It's set in like a red state, American city,
and on top of that, even if it doesn't take place in America, the tone, the way that the characters have dialogue, I would argue, is very westernized. And to the point where I would say, do you like Monster? This is very much in the same vein, not only in terms of pace, but in terms of revelation and build-up.
And most importantly, socio-political issues.
Definitely.
Because a lot of those things, I would argue, don't necessarily exist in Asia, let alone Japan.
Right.
So I think that if you are an American or of a Western nation and you come across this, I feel that this would speak to you a lot more than someone in Japan, even though, of course, it's won so many awards in Japan, right? So clearly there's some popularity based on the fact that it's got this many awards and it's also getting an adaptation. But I think that with the way that the characters, like Jason said, they speak, the way that they talk talk about certain social issues, political issues in the manga, and then soon to be in the anime, it just feels like this is this. It's an American story.
Yeah. And if you were to listen to our BP30, which we encourage you to do, where we had conversations with our mutual good friend Vishal Nanda, I mentioned briefly that the Darwin Incident, reading it, made me feel immensely uncomfortable. And as an American, there is extra weight to that.
Just to sort of give like a little trigger warning, the topics that are involved in Darwin Incident include, well, bestiality being one of them, terrorism, racism, xenophobia. I think those are enough, right? And so you might think, wow, like, why are we even covering something that's such that's of such heavy discussion? Like there's really no easy way to talk about any of those things.
Yeah.
And it also made it kind of tough to read the manga, except that I'm up to current. I haven't read volume 6 yet, but I've read everything that came before it.
Since
You're not that far off yourself.
Well, since last we talked, I have not read a single page more. I'll just say that. Not because I didn't want to, but yeah, personal circumstances and time, basically. But I think in terms of the 4 that we're mentioning today, this one is the one that is literally, I have no idea how it will be received, because clearly, despite its accolades, 7.26 to me is very accurate in terms of how I think people would feel about it one way or the other. And I think the anime, I have no idea, especially with no footage. I have no idea.
I think the reason why it has such a low score in comparison to the others, look, 7.26 is still a pretty good score for what it is, right? I think it's because of the fact that when you're talking about controversy, there's always going to be 2 sides. And more often than not, I think, like, especially with controversy, people would want to err more on the side of safety. And therefore, a lot of the topics will probably not fly all that well for the general reader.
And I can tell you from reading the Darwin Incident, they hold no bars. They go all the way with a lot of these very tough to discuss, very ambiguous kind of issues.
And the reason why it's very tough to read is because a lot of what's discussed in the manga is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of terrorism, in terms of acts of war, in terms of people trying to voice their opinion, but in ways that are a lot more impeding of your own liberties than you might want.
Extremism, or you could argue, okay, it's not exactly the same.
Human rights.
Yeah, animal rights.
Representation.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's such a scary possibility that you can see it happening and unfolding, maybe not in the exact same way in terms of IRL.
I would argue that, like, aside from the whole human chimpanzee thing,
yeah,
a lot of the stuff that's in there has already happened, if not already happening right now.
Or will happen, right?
Yeah.
And look, of course, when you hear the premise, the thing that everyone will latch onto, and we don't blame you, is the half human, half chimpanzee. And to be honest, in my opinion, obviously it's the central focal point of a character that revolves around the Darwin Incident. But it's everything that is happening and unfolding that is really what makes the Darwin Incident so horrifying to me. It's like Monster, right? It's like, again, I don't know if we want to spoil Monster, at least in the beginning, but a certain decision in Monster was made in the very, very beginning that unfolds the events of essentially the manga and the anime. And the ramifications, the guilt, the progression of characters is so fucked up and uncomfortable.
I think the difference, though, is that with Monster, it's a psycho thriller.
Yes.
Whereas with Darwin Incident, it's a social thriller.
Yes.
So a lot of the things that happen within Monster are very much pertained to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it is the main character, whether the doctor, whether it is the quote-unquote
the villain,
monster,
yeah.
whether it is all the other characters that are fighting for or against certain things. with Darwin Incident, it is very much a populist thing where like a lot of times when a certain issue is raised in the socio-political sphere, there are always two sides, whether you are for it or against it. And when there is one side that feels a bit more strongly than the other side, sometimes the way they voice their opinion is not just through their words, but also through their actions. And you may not like the actions they take. And so that's why, like, with this particular manga, I do see some pushback in terms of people accepting it.
Yeah, and I also feel
it's tough.
I also feel like the fact that, Will, you and I are both North Americans, we see Darwin Incident in a different light, I would argue, than a lot of other people.
Well, it's because, well, for me, it's because I've lived through a lot of the things they've done, not directly, but like a lot of the events that have played out in Darwin Incident, I have witnessed firsthand. And so have you.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people who are in our similar situation would feel the same way.
Yeah. Maybe not to that severity, maybe not to that conclusion, but definitely of the same ilk, right?
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, like, mad uncomfortable, bro. Like, in a good... And I mean that by... In our BP30, when I said it made me feel immensely uncomfortable, Vishal was like, no, that says something about the property, and I'm like, yes, it does. It's great. But as an anime, or like recommending it to people, I have no idea.
I would have no problem recommending it, because in the end, it's like you don't have to recommend something just for someone to enjoy, right? There's always a room for discussion, regardless of whatever piece of art or media that you consume. There's a reason. I mean, like, why do you watch crime thrillers?
Right. It's not like I want to be and learn from it to be a killer.
Right.
It's just I either have a morbid curiosity or I'm just like interested.
Or you just want to see like what compels certain people to commit crimes.
Right.
What compels people to solve crimes, right? In the same way that why do we watch documentaries when like there's no, I guess, direct entertainment out of it? It's so that you learn something from it, or maybe you form an opinion about it. And I think that that's what Darwin Incident is. It's not meant to be something that's like look, I do I enjoy it as like a piece of art, as a piece of entertainment? Fuck no, because it is so hard to enjoy certain elements in terms of like its core themes.
I understand what you're trying to say.
In terms of promoting a discussion, in terms of me internalizing my feelings about certain things, that's where I'm like, this is fucking great.
I think it's an exceptional manga. I give it a 9 out of 10. I also feel like it's one of those mangas that
There's a reason why of the four, this is the most controversial, because you will either love it or hate it. And I agree with you in a sense that if you were to recommend it, more often than not, you would get pushback. And you would be like, dude, this thing is garbage, or this thing is gross or fucking like insane. Like, I don't see any enjoyment out of it. But then I feel at that point they're kind of missing the point.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, like it's not meant to be something where you like watch like an action adventure series, or you try and delve into the inner workings of like a romance drama and all that.
And what I like about the Darwin Incident a lot is they play everything out in its entirety, almost to like the most realistic degree ever. Things in terms of when things happen, the ramifications, in terms of consequences of countries and worlds.
Dude, they don't hold back on the fucked up things.
Yeah. And when I mean by fucked up, I don't mean like crazy gore, crazy like body horror Junji Ito stuff. I'm talking about like
social issues.
Yeah, like real stuff. Like if this were to happen IRL, minus a couple of weird fictional elements of the Darwin Incident, I would say it's pretty accurate to real life people and events, and I can see this happening in real life and unfolding as it happens.
Yeah. I think that the thing that works with it as well is like if you replaced the Charlie, the human Z, with just a regular human being or a regular animal, I don't think it would succeed as much. I think it's because the fact that there's something that's so absurdist about this.
Because it's the focal point. That's the issue, right?
It's so crazy that you can actually kind of connect with it, because you disassociate yourself from like the realities of war, terrorism, racism, xenophobia, and you focus on what's happening here. and you see how they play it out.
Yeah. And I think one of its strengths and also its kind of uncomfortable truths is you don't have to look that far across the world for, all of these bad stuff. You just have to look in your backyard.
Yeah, I think uncomfortable is the word of the day for this particular manga because damn, like when you're reading this, you're just like, I've seen this shit happen in real life and it did not end well, and I don't know like if they realize it in the manga, but yo, shit's about to get really fucked and you have to make a choice on where you stand on things.
And on top of all this, it's made by Japanese people, Japanese publishers. Not to say that they don't have any right to, obviously they do, but it almost makes it extra poignant, extra impactful because they figured it out or they want to tackle it when it's a society where they want to brush everything under the rug or not acknowledge it, right?
When we talked about Get Schooled in the last episode of JP, this is what they should be doing. This is like these are Japanese creators creating a story that is central to American culture, American politics, American
and being
social,
on point, by the way,
and not doing things purely out of shock, but actually posing tough questions for people to get uncomfortable and figure out where they sit.
And it's genuine shock, by the way, not shocking, right?
Yeah.
It earns it in a way, but
like you see something unfold and you'll just be like, wow. Even in fiction, they could not prevent this fucked up thing from happening. And we saw this shit in real life.
So what chances do we have?
Which really hammers home the uncomfortability about Darwin Incident, which is why, like, I understand that there could be some caution in terms of how well it's going to do. Look, as far as
let's get into that.
As far as seinen series go, in terms of getting adaptations, a whole lot of them do not do well. And it's probably because, one, they're tough to animate because you have to figure out how to balance out sensitivities whilst also getting enough like engagement and entertainment.
They don't have a lot of flashy action scenes and crazy fantastical, magic and stuff. But
that's the thing too. There's no beating around the bush. As absurd as it is to see a human see, this shit is as real as can be.
Now, Toho Animation, so they technically have not announced which studio is doing it other than Toho, because, for example, Jujutsu Kaisen is technically Toho.
Yeah.
Kaiju number 8 is technically Toho. Anything by Science Saru is technically Toho. So the fact that they said Toho by itself implies a certain level of weight because, for better or for worse, and in my opinion, for the better, Toho Animation has a lot of resources, has a lot of experience in adapting anime of every sort.
As a production company, they've done crazy work. I mean, I'll just list a couple things, right? My Hero Academia, Kaiju number 8, Mushoku Tensei, Bartender, the new series, right? The Haikyuu movie,
JJK?
Buchigiri, yes, JJK. They were also on the production committee for that one. Frieren, right? Uma Musume. Dr. Stone, they have had a hand in a lot of really successful shit. Spy Family, the Angel Next Door Supposed to Be Rotten, right?
Right. So they definitely have the chops to deliver. Now the question then becomes,
who the fuck's gonna actually be the studio?
And furthermore, when is the release date? And furthermore, on top of all that, how long is the series gonna be? And all of these questions, I think, especially with this one in particular of the 4 that we're talking about today, is extremely iffy. Not only because there's nothing available other than a poster and an announcement.
It's also got the fewest volumes.
Yes.
Only 6 volumes right now.
And
the 6th one only just came out last month.
Yeah, and I think one of those things, like, imagine if you were to read Monster and have it all completed versus binging it as you go. I think it's very different.
It's kind of cautiously it's one that I'm actually most excited for.
I think it has the most potential, and I think it's the most interesting one for sure.
I think whether or not it's good, I actually still want to see it. Simply because of the
Absolutely.
fact that it is a premise that is not meant to be like super engaging with people. It's not meant to be like, yo, check out this, like you said, crazy action scenes. Oh, look at these romance plots and whatnot. No, this is something that is essentially a very meta social commentary of the world we live in today.
And it's extremely heavy, bro.
It's real. And like that's why like I would cautiously recommend it to people in the sense that like if you want to watch something and be wowed in the good way, then this is not it for you. But if you want to sit down and really think about the world and how fucked up things are, yo, Darwin Incident is right here for you.
When you said earlier the Darwin Incident is a type of show or a type of manga that will incite conversation and discussion, I think that illustrates how powerful the Darwin Incident is.
It's probably why it won those awards. It's not meant to be entertaining. It's meant to be just a real depiction of, or a fictional depiction of real world shit.
And maybe that's why the mouse score is that low, because it's that divisive, right?
Yeah. I think that those are the kinds of conversations we want to have. We don't want to talk about shows that are 6s and 7s just because they're bad. We want to have talks about shows that are on the borderline because it's hard to see what side of the spectrum you're on in terms of whether you hate this, like this, whether you're good or uncomfortable about it.
Now, I would argue of all the seinens that we have mentioned in the past, like the Fable or
My Home
Hero, I would argue the Darwin Incident is very pivotal in that if this one does not work for whatever reason, it might be a very big blow for a lot of future seinen adaptations.
That's hard. I think it's just the fact that like its story is so out there that it might get a pass.
But I also feel like if it executes it well, everyone is going to lose their minds in terms of like...
It will be the flag bearer.
Yeah, it would be. Or it will be a martyr.
Yeah, it's either going to die in battle and be forgotten or remembered for its fight, or it will, stand the test of time against all odds and be a success.
Now, Will, as a personal me to you, you have obviously read past until Volume 5, right?
Yeah.
I have not read Volume 4 or 5, and neither of us have read 6. Is 4 or 5 the same in terms of consistency and quality as the first 3 volumes?
It ups the ante.
Okay. I mean, that's to be expected,
But
right?
In terms of like adding shock into the series as the point of consistency, yes, it has that.
So then the question then becomes, how long do you think this anime can be?
I figured you're going to ask something along the lines of how is this going to end?
Because this issue has this episode count or whatever. I mean, there are several factors. When will the manga end? And where would the quote-unquote anime adaptation end?
Here's my speculation. I think that Toho Animation, as the production committee, is working very closely with the mangaka in figuring out what his plans are.
Right.
And there's a chance, based on what I've read so far, that the manga will end sooner than you think.
Really?
Simply because I think that if you continue to... with these kinds of stories, right? As impactful as they are, the impact only works if it's sustainable.
Yes,
and once you've gone
correct.
past a certain point where like you have to start wrangling.
I mean, it's like
new
Orb,
things.
right? In that, like, if you overstay your welcome, or if you don't stick the landing, you're fucked. Like, the whole thing is then ruined, in my opinion. Obviously, the journeys will be worth it, but then it will be remembered as a what-if scenario rather than this is amazing.
It's the Bleach conundrum. How do you top Bleach if the guy's already got all the superpowers? You just make new superpowers and give them those as well, right? You can't have that with series like Darwin Incident because if it's so real and so pertainable to how we view the world IRL, then there has to be an endpoint. It's the same way like I've mentioned Narcos before. Narcos Mexico is about the Mexican drug war. It's still ongoing to this day. The producers have made it very clear that after season 3, which covers like the 80s and the 90s, there's absolutely no point in doing any more. Because if you were, you're grasping at straws. You're just basically making stories to the state. And instead, you're not able to leave an impact of how bad the war on drugs is in Mexico. If you were to continue to make more and more sensationalized depictions of the Mexican drug war, you would lose the appeal of the series. Much like with Darwin Incident, if you continue to harp down on all of the social political issues and continue to grow them without a proper end in sight, you lose the message that has been built up from chapter 1 till now.
Yeah. Now, I also agree.
So I think that the reason why we don't have a release date yet, nor an animation studio placed in, is because they are in conversation. Toho Animation is in conversation with the mangaka in terms of when it's going to end and how it's going to end. Then, once the final chapter is ready, they'll package it all in the volume, they'll announce a studio, announce a release date, and release it in tandem with when the final volume of the manga comes out.
Now, that goes into the other thing is, if, let's say, the anime is coming out, whatever, when, right? Let's just say it has a set date. How many curs, how many episodes do you think, based on what we know? And I'm going to pose another question, which is, do you think, for example, it might be a Netflix show?
I'll get to the second one in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think, based on the fact that they just released the sixth one, and after reading Volume 5, I don't think it's close to finishing. I think it's still got, some legs.
It's just sooner rather than later, right?
I think it will end by... If it gets to double digits, I think it'll end by Volume 10 or 11.
Right.
And so, therefore, I think, as you might have read from the first two volumes, I can also attest to it with the subsequent volumes afterwards, that there are certain things that can be cut or at least condensed. So if they were able to do it right, they could probably get it done in 2 curs. Now, whether or not they will do a off-the-cuff, just 2 cur adaptation straight away, that's to be seen. But I don't see this as it would be really weird as an anime to see Darwin Incident Season 2. I just can't see that happening. Because it has to be a self-contained story within one telling.
Right.
That's it. You tell it once and you tell it last. That's it. There's no need to continue that story beyond what's already on the paper and what's already on the screen. So I think that if it was according to my little theory of them finishing the manga first and then releasing it in tandem with the adaptation, 2 curs,
right,
back to back,
or maybe 2 curs and a movie. Maybe.
I don't think it would just be weird to see it as a movie as well. It would be weird.
Well, maybe it's like an epilogue, right? Just like how Wonder Egg Priority has a 1-hour epilogue, even though that fell flat.
You saw how they fucked that up, and I think that I would worry about that too if it was that kind of situation where they make a 1 cur and then they wrap everything up in a movie. I don't see this as something as look. I know that the mangaka definitely made this to make some money as well. There's no way that they're doing this.
That's just business, bro.
Yeah, right? So they have to make money somehow. But I also believe that the right move would be to do a straight back-to-back double cur to encapsulate all 8, 9, 10, I think at most 10 volumes, and then just leave it at that.
For me, at the very most, I would say split cur is acceptable, but has to be within a split cur.
Yeah, I would say like Darwin Incident and Darwin Incident Part 2.
Yes,
but I wouldn't be like the sequel. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't be like get ready for season 2 of Darwin. No, that would be crazy to see.
Yeah, and I also feel like if you were to stop midway, it's also a travesty because where would you stop?
I feel like with this, like it's a legacy show. It's a show that will be talked about, right? It's just in the same way that we're talking about the manga now. And so I think it would be a disservice to not do the whole thing, but it would also be crazy to be like season 2, season 3, season 4, however many.
I also think, as you accurately pointed out, the fact that we don't really know anything about it, despite actually it being announced for quite some time, to me indicates, as you accurately said,
Yeah, it was announced,
very deliberate.
The adaptation process, the news was released back in May.
I mean, out of these 4, the Darwin Incident was the last that we tacked on, and it turns out to be the most strongest in terms of what I feel we can discuss or speculate. And the one I'm definitely not thinking that it would be the most amazing anime, but it's definitely the most interesting one that I'm like thinking about all the time. And I think at the end of the day, when an anime or a manga, after you finish consuming it, or you put down your iPad or turn off the TV, close the laptop screen, and you still think about it in terms of the issues, the plight, your stances, that's a really powerful anime. That's a really powerful manga.
So when Volume 7 came out, the Japanese version, right? Because it's not adapted in English yet. So because for English, the most we have right now is Volume 6. When they announced, when they released Volume 7, that also in tandem was when they announced the manga, the adaptation for the anime. And so based on how I'm seeing it, where they release 2 volumes every year, it's been running for 4 years, right? So by the end of this year, we should have a Volume 8 for it. I think that based on that timeline, and if I'm correct that it will end, if not by the 9th volume, then it'll end by the 10th volume, it will release summer or fall of 2025.
And bear in mind, Will, remember one of our first ASAPs that we talked about is an anime or a manga in this case as well, which had Atelier. And we have not heard jack shit about it until recently. Out of nowhere, they're like at some expo, they're like, oh yeah, it's coming out in 2025. Right. And we're just like, you announced it like years ago, bro. Mm-hmm. And we're waiting this long. I could see Darwin Incident
26?
Getting similar kind of treatment as well, in terms of not delay, because they didn't technically delay, but in terms of when we will hear back next.
I mean, yeah, I would say like optimistically it will be out fall 2025.
Yeah.
I would not be surprised if it came out in 2026 though.
And I think it's one of those shows where it has to be in the fall, because that's where everyone's eyeballs will be on it.
Yep. Or you release it in the summer when there's nothing to watch.
I mean, at that point, then we can say, oh, it might as well be in the winter and in the spring as well, then, right?
I think, look, of the 4, I am the least confident about Darwin Incident doing well.
Likewise.
Just because of how divisive it is. But it's also the one that I'm the most looking forward to.
Right.
Because you know that Medalist is going to do well. You know that Blue Box is going to do well. You know that Nina is going to do fine.
It's predictable. Yeah.
Right? But with Darwin, it's like...
I have no idea, bro.
This crazy crackpot shit is just like, this could either be amazing or this could also be fucking terrible. But I'm here for it, and I will absolutely watch it when it comes out. Of the 4, this will be the one that when it premieres, I will definitely be watching it.
I also think it will be a Netflix show. It's super poised to be one.
No. Does Netflix get a lot of seinen?
I just think it's appeal.
Or do you think just because,
world appeal?
And also because it's American as shit, right?
Yeah, I think it's very easy for Netflix to grab it and publicize it all over the world.
I mean, you also did say that, like, we also talked about, like, if it got on Netflix, would they also simulcast it with a live action,
right? With, like, Zom 100 and shit. Yeah, I think there's a very good chance it will. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
No, I mean, like, once you name Netflix, you know that they're going to milk the fuck out of it. And it does sound like the perfect platform to have. It actually does sound kind of weird that it would be on Crunchyroll.
Yeah.
Even though it probably will. It probably will because
now, Will, do you think Science Saru will do it?
Okay. Science Saru doing it is very dependent on what they do with Dan.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, just in case you listeners think I just pulled it out of like nowhere, Science Saru is under the conglomerate of Toho Animation.
They got bought out just a few months ago.
So in essence, it is not out of the realm of possibility for Toho Animation, especially with Ong Young Choi doing like Scott Pilgrim, which also has Netflix ties, right? And also other Western properties done by Science Saru. For me, at least, to speculate that they might be one of the studios that potentially could adapt this, minus possibility of Dan being like on their slate all the time.
I think that's entirely possible, but it also depends on how they work on Dan and whether Dan will be a long-running adaptation for Science Sorrow, because now that they're under a new corporate structure, now that they have a new direction, it could be that for them they just focus on Dan and one or two works here. But
I mean, Will, you and I, when we talked about Dan before they got bought out, right? We were like, Science Sorrow is the type where they'll do 1 or 2 seasons and then pass it off to someone else, and then they go, here's the blueprint, follow it for a season.
They've rarely ever done a sequel, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I would argue under this new umbrella, the priorities might have shifted. Or, hey, maybe you got to earn money.
I will say, I don't care who does it as long as it's not Tezuka Productions.
Amen to that.
And there's the ending for today's episode of the Good Anime Palette Podcast.
So, today we went over Nina the Starry Bride, Blue Box, Medalist, and the Darwin Incident. We also would like to let you know that we really thank you for listening to this episode of the Good Anime Palette Podcast. If you want, you can leave a rating or review. We greatly appreciate it. If you want to contact us, our email is gapalette@gmail.com, GAPALETTE, all lowercase, all one word, using the handle @PaletteGood, capital P and capital G, all one word, on Twitter/X. Our invite link for our Discord server and our other social media platforms are in the show description. We have a website, www.goodanimepalette.com, all lowercase, all one word. Music credits for this episode. Our intro music is Married to the Light by oomiee. Our break music is Green Summer Waves by Qeeo. And our outro music is Weeping by Cushy. You can support the music artists that we feature by listening to them on Spotify, Apple Music, or your music listening platform of choice. And Epidemic Sound provides all of our royalty-free music. If you're interested, you can sign up using the referral link in our show description. Terms and conditions apply.
This was arguably, for me anyway, the best lineup of ASAP choices that we've done so far. We've done 7 of them, right? I was thinking, like, how does this match up with ASAP 5, where we did Orb, Fable, QA in Another World, as well as Windbreaker. And they were all, well, okay, 2 of them were amazing. One was pretty good, and then the other one was, it's okay, which ended up actually having a pretty good anime, right? Windbreaker. This one, yes, Nina, I was a bit more lukewarm about it, but I still enjoyed it. Whereas the other 3, like, the fact that I'm almost current with all 3 of them is just like, it's a testament to how good these choices are. In manga form, it's to be seen how well they'll perform as anime.
I mean, ASAP 3 is pretty strong. I'm looking at it right now. What we have: Witch Hat Atelier, Fieren,
Okay.
Apothecary Diaries, and The Witch and the Beast, and the 100 Girlfriends Who Really, Really, Really Love You.
Okay, fair. No, that one's a really good too. Except the fact that, like, Witch and the Beast, the anime fucking sucks.
And technically, if we were to exclude, what was it, number 5, right? You said Windbreaker, The Fable, Orb, and QA Isekai.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're right, but
5 was still pretty good. 3 was actually pretty excellent too.
yeah. Jesus Christ, there's a lot. I mean, speaking of that, Will, you have actually read ahead for our next ASAP already.
I'm looking forward to that one too.
And let me just tell you, bro, it's gonna be crazy too. So only time will tell how these animes will pan out, whether it is the ones that we just discussed or the ones that we will be discussing. But we hope that you will be ready for when that time comes for Will and I to talk shop about these mangas that will eventually become an anime near you. Will, any parting thoughts before we peace out for this episode?
Get on Blue Box, get on Medalist. If you skip Nina, I won't blame you. And let's have a chat about Darwin Incident. That's going to be a very, very controversial discussion down the road, but I'm all for it.
Yeah, that's about it. Peace out.
See ya.